Tracy, we are so excited to have you back on the podcast. As we were just talking about before we pressed record, the subject of in-laws is so important. And I was telling you that one of the first episodes we recorded together was one of our most downloaded episodes of all time. So we thought we've got to have you back. We've got to talk in-laws. The thing about in-law dynamics, and Abby and I have experienced this, is it does change in different seasons. So we're in new seasons since we last spoke to you. So we want to dive in. One thing that we saw on your Instagram page is you said you didn't marry just him. You married his family's patterns. Now, you know that we love a hard-hitting question right away. And when we saw this quote, we thought, okay, but what is the balance here? Where is it that we kind of accept that he came with this family? They've got their patterns, but where do we balance the way we feel about those patterns and maybe making some boundaries when they go too far?
Yeah. Oh, I think that is such a good question. And I just want to pause to express my gratitude to both of you for all the work that you're doing in this area, for supporting women, helping them in their marriages, have these hard conversations, and really with that desire so that they're not alone in this struggle and that they feel like it's not just me. And when it comes to these patterns, I think something that's so important to recognize first is that you are not the bad one for calling out the pattern and for noticing it. And I think that is really important to sink into, in that sense of you didn't grow up in it. You're going to be an outsider of it, and it's going to be easier to label. Now, that's a good thing, and it can also sometimes be a bit of a challenge. And it's what I outline in the couples in my upcoming book, is that you then can sometimes get into these patterns where it then creates more problems with your partner because they are not yet aware of it. And I do this in the first few chapters. In chapter 2, I outline 10 common toxic family dynamics so that you can give voice to those. And then also in chapter 1, I'm labeling 6 types of mothers-in-law, not so that we're going to diagnose women, but so we can categorize a group of behaviors and then understand, how do we show up to that? And what then strategies can we use to support that? So what do we do with these family patterns? Well, first, I say to all couples, we don't abandon our families. We're not going to exclude them. That's not the goal. And the goal of this book really is about creating healthy patterns, healthy connections in families with a strong marriage. So I especially say this to men because it's sometimes hard for them to hear this. It's not your job to make mom happy, to please her, to always do what she wants. Now that you have chosen a partner, now that you have a newborn, now that you have an 8 and a 10-year-old who wants to go see their friends and go to soccer practice, our job is no longer to keep looking to mom or extended family members to keep them happy, but instead to choose together and turn towards your spouse. This is the person you've chosen. Now you as a team come together and decide, how do we want to do this? And the important piece around this is it's not just, I don't want to go to your family's Sunday dinner every night. But really, and I walk couples through this in the first step of my vault method, which is, what's really important to you? Boundaries need to come from our values and what matters to us.
I love the idea that we've experienced that you can really work on these relationships. We don't want to write books or make podcast episodes where it sounds like, just cut the tie or don't work on it. And I think on both ends, the way that I see people getting it wrong is a lot of times we're looking for what the in-law is doing wrong. And I can relate to this. I was on high alert, especially after my first child. And then I had to take a step back and also recognize how much I was looking for what they were doing wrong, and that was a moment of like, wait, what do I actually really care about? And what could I let go? Because if you have a problem with everything, that's really hard to have a good relationship with someone.
I talk about 3 different daughter-in-law styles. And we talk about the good girl daughter-in-law and the manager daughter-in-law, and then the balanced one. And sometimes when we are in seasons that are even challenging for us, we might shift in between them, right? So I think of the new mom, and maybe this was your experience, Amy, but I know for many moms, a lot of anxiety shows up, a lot of uncertainty. a lot of just trying to get through the day. And then I almost describe it like this traumatic response every night of like, are we going to sleep tonight? What's going to happen? And you're on edge and you're hypervigilant. And it's like, how am I going to survive the next day? How am I going to survive the next week, the next month? And so then what do we naturally do in those moments of stress? We try to control things.
Mm.
And then if we're entering into high levels of control and someone else is coming in with their expectations, that's going to bump up against things. And it's not to say that you're doing anything wrong, but it is this dynamic that really shows up. And it's why the title of my book really is You, Your Husband, and His Mother. All three of you, nobody's in the middle. All three of you are in this triangle, and all three of you play a part in this role. And so this isn't a book. This is people, when I coach with people, when I work with them in therapy, this is something that they know about me. I'm showing up with so much empathy and compassion for you. And you are sitting across from me. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a nudge. Let's look at what you're bringing to the table. And so in chapter 3, we really talk about the baggage you bring in. What are your expectations? What were your desires of a mother-in-law? What are the unmet needs that you have? And I talk about the different inner child types that are going to show up that might create a bit of that clashing in that relationship.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And when you're talking, it's like we're going through these huge life events together, but also separately, obviously, because I've got my role, she's got her role. And when I had my first baby, that was one of the first times that I really experienced anxiety that wasn't just, it was situational, but it was an extended period of time. And so I was not acting like my normal self because everything had changed for me.
Well, and even as you say that, Amy, I think about the swing for the mother-in-law. So going from, and I experienced it too, going from the good girl of you're getting along. I mean, I married my mother-in-law.
Abby's very good at playing the good girl.
Yeah, I'm very good at playing the good girl. And Colin's mom and I are so similar in so many ways. So we just had so much in common, especially before we had kids. We had so much in common. So we would, go shopping together. We would talk together. We would, clean up together. We would cook together. It was a really, really fun thing to do. And then all of a sudden the control takes over. That also happened after the first kiddo. And you just want your own little slice of heaven to just remain as much of heaven as you can, even though nothing is certain. Like you said, Tracy, nothing is in your control. Everything feels out of sorts, but it feels like this internal battle inside of you. But your mother-in-law is also seeing all of a sudden this possible swing in her daughter-in-law too. So that can be really, really hard. I want to ask a question about this too, because we struggled with this in the beginning of our relationship between Colin and his mom. And I know a lot of people in the herself community also struggle with this, with the husband not speaking up. So something's going on. There's trouble. There's challenges. We notice it. I'm bringing it up to Colin, but he's not bringing it up to his mom. And it's hard because in this situation, I want to keep the peace. Like there's might be an issue between his mom and I. There might be a challenge that I have that I want to bring up. What are we supposed to do in this situation? Because are we supposed to be the ones that chime in? Should our partner chime in? How can we make it better for all parties involved?
This is such a good question, Abby. And whenever I DM you and talk with you or see what you post, I'm like, we're the same person. Good girl, daughter-in-law, right here, right? And it's tricky again because you are an outsider, and the goal, of course, is a family to bring you in. And so that you're not the outsider, you're not the scapegoat. And unfortunately for many women, they end up being the problem. They end up identified as the bad guy or why they're having problems. There are some mothers-in-law that will say, well, we never had these problems before Abby joined the family, right? And so, and not to say that that's what your mother-in-law was saying, but just a sense of, whoa, why is this shifting so much? It feels really strange. But it's tricky because when we can so easily label something, then our husband's dynamics come up, and they can sometimes end up repeating some of those things. So one of the common things I see in married couples is the man saying, that's not what my mom intended. You're being too sensitive. That's not what happened. And so it's this pattern of denial. And it's not, I think this is so important too, because we want to show up with empathy and compassion to our partners. Most men are not doing this maliciously. They're doing it because they are products of their patterns as well. And so it's hard then for them to understand, like, well, what's happening here? Because I'm in the middle, and I feel like I'm supposed to keep my wife happy, but I also want to keep my mom happy. And so I think when it comes to talking and setting boundaries with families, a lot of people ask who should be doing it. And my response to that really is it depends, but I have more specifics around that. Many women will say, I have a good, loving, close relationship with my mother in law, and I can go to her and share things. And she maybe is the supporter mother in law type, and she says, I'm so glad you came to me. Oh, yes, let's work on this together. We'll all come together. She might have hurt feelings because boundaries are hard for family to hear. Like, the supportive mother in law wants to come over to meet baby in the first week, but you've decided that's a hard no because you're in that bonding, cocooning stage for you. So that is one situation. But a lot of scenarios are more that the husband needs to go to his mom. So I say to people, you as the adult child, go and set boundaries with your own families. And the reason you do this is because you have that lifelong relationship with them. And I know then the next question is, well, what if my husband doesn't? I'll get to that in a minute. But there's this kind of piece here where then how does your partner go to their parent? And there's almost this small challenge that shows up that a lot of men aren't aware of. And actually, I just worked through this with a few months ago, where he would go to his mom and mom would be like, hey, you're still breastfeeding? Like, I'll just use Abby and Colin as an example. Abby's still breastfeeding? Colin, like, when do I get to be part of this feeding? I'm grandma. I want to be part of it. And Colin innocently says, Mom, Abby's making the choice to breastfeed and blah, 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 right? Abby's making the choice to co-sleep. Abby's making this choice about our family. And right there immediately, Colin has divided you two. It's such a small example of what commonly shows up in relationships. Instead of going to mom, hey, mom, you know what? We're making this decision together. We'll let you know when we're in this next season that you can take part of that. But we are doing this together. Or Abby doesn't want to come for Sunday dinner. Abby doesn't want you to sleep over. And instead saying, we're not going to be able to show up this weekend because we have so much on the go, but let's make sure we do that next weekend. It's such a small nuance, but it really is this boundary setting to then show up together as a united front so that parents on either side can't split the two of you.
We actually had that exact issue with the breastfeeding. We actually had that exact issue. Like I said, my mother-in-law, we have a very, very good relationship, but we just are so different as parents. And now looking back, there was so many things that they meant so much to me at the time that I probably could have been a little bit easier going on. And also the things that she naturally has strengths at, I don't have the strengths at. So together we make a really, really good team. But it did take several years of figuring out it's not you against me. It's together we make a better team. But even just, the simple thing of we are deciding this. This is our choice. We aren't. It's the smallest thing, but it can make a really big impact. I'm so glad you brought that up because it's just the small changes of language that we can all start even just today.
Absolutely. And there's this reminder here too. And I say this to men that I work with. I say, doing nothing and saying nothing to your mother creates more of a problem and it hurts the relationship between your mother and your wife. And I know you're here because you want to have a good relationship between everyone. I know you're here because you all want to go as your family unit and join your family for that holiday event or have, grandmère and grandpère come over and sleep over. You want those things. And so it's time for you to get really uncomfortable. And I recognize that you've never really been able to say no to mom. And many men use, not all, but many use compartmentalization or avoidance. And those strategies don't work now when you have your own family. And so it really is that flip of saying nothing makes it worse.
Well, it was interesting to watch their dynamic play out because it was like Colin desires to be such a good son. Abby was desiring to be such a good daughter. It was like they were trying to out good each other instead of being like, okay, as a couple, this is, together we want to have this good relationship.
Yes, I can just put myself right back into that position. I'm glad that we've worked through so many of those pieces because it's much, much better now. But I do want to know, because you're bringing up all these different patterns, and to me, it almost sounds like a habit because once you get into a pattern, you just continue to do it because it just feels natural. What other generational patterns come up in the couples that you work with?
Yeah, we've already mentioned denial.
Yeah.
There's often this sense of control and rigidity where perhaps, we think about the matriarch, right? And I talk about kin keeping in the book and how women today, and this is part of why we have this tension between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law, is because women today are saying, I know more and I'm doing differently than you. And it's not bad. It's not to say what you did before doesn't work, but today I don't want to be the kin keeper. I'm holding this high mental load. I'm back to work after X number of weeks after just having a baby. I'm soccer appointments, doctor's appointments, all these things. And then you want me to kin keep with your family on top of my family. So for many women today, they're saying, I don't want to do that. And then it has to go back to men. And then what's happening though is that they're not communicating around how do we build a healthy relationship? And so then one of those patterns that shows up there is around the rigidity and control, saying, this is how our family does it. You have to come for Thanksgiving on this day. You have to be here for this. And truthfully, we see previous generations. We hear from the boomers, that's just what you did. It's a snowstorm. It's an 8-hour drive. You pack up the 1-month-old and all the Christmas gifts and you drive through the snowstorm to get to mom's house because that's how holidays were spent. And today couples don't want to do that. So that's one that really shows up in relationships that we're trying to break out of today. And it looks different.
I actually have a lot of friends that they're like, this is our Christmas. I will never miss this, that type of, and I'm like, that's a tough energy to bring into a marriage because you're working with two different families, if not more than two different families. So there's a lot of traditions to be accounted for.
It's so tricky. And anytime we meet anything with rigidity, we're going to struggle in that. So, and that's the piece too, when we talk about compromise is you don't get, here's the reality. In a healthy relationship, it doesn't always look your way. We don't say to Drew, hey, Drew, come and play in my sandbox. Oh, but you can't bring your cars and trucks. The sandbox, we're only doing shovels and buckets. Leave those cars and trucks, right? Like that's not a relationship. A relationship is co-creation. It's interdependence where we get to be a self. That's our autonomy. And we build interconnectedness and intimacy and say, hey, I'm going to build a castle right here, but you can build a road with your cars and trucks around it and we can play together in the sandbox.
Absolutely. Another thing that we've heard you talk about is this idea that some mother-in-laws or mothers tend to take on this martyr personality. And we've heard from our friends, they were able to give us some really good example of what that sounds like for them. But I want to know from you, what does it feel like when you're dealing with someone that plays the martyr, and what can you do if you're in these shoes?
I would love to hear those examples if you can share them. But I think the kind of one phrase for a martyr is someone who gives with guilt attached. She wants to be the endless giver, but then we'll say something like, well, nobody appreciates what I do here, or after all I've done for you, or we'll say yes to repeatedly look after the grandkids. And then we'll say the next day, I'm just so exhausted. I guess I'll just have to keep doing this. And it's really this sense of I'm going to give, but then I want to make sure that you're giving me something in return.
Yeah, we heard a lot of tears. So when something switches or doesn't go their way, or the family can't make it to family dinner, the mother-in-law crying. And for a lot of men, I feel like tears make them nervous and make them want to comply more with what the mom wants. What else were we talking about?
The being so tired. So watching the kids the entire day. And then at the end being like, oh, I'm so exhausted. And then you're just wondering, you said you wanted to watch the kids, but now you're complaining about being tired. Did you actually want to watch them? Should we change something? I think it's the way
that they say it too, or the complaining to other people. Like you didn't know that she had a problem with it because to you, she's really nice, but then she's complaining and telling all the rest of the family, like they ask so much of me. They always ask me to babysit, like that type of energy.
You have shared some of the common stories that show up in my book. And honestly, when I'm sitting with people, especially let's say in the past 6 months with the book being done already, I've said to you, I've said to this client and a few of them, I've said, you might recognize yourself in my book, but I just want you to know that while your story is the same, it's not your story in the book. It's this common experience for us to come together. And the piece, I don't sit here and blame and shame mothers-in-law. I sit here with understanding and compassion. We can understand that they came from their own patterns. And they did try to break some of those cycles as well in their own way. And so I think what then the book is really about. It's about empowering women to have their sense of agency and control back and build that healthy partnership with their partner. And then to say, how do I want to respond to that? That guilt is not yours to own. And that is one of the best things someone can do, especially the good girl daughter-in-laws. This is not yours to own. This is their feeling. And if you are absorbing that guilt, one of the things that tells me is that there is a values conflict here. And that makes sense. The value of, we really want to have our Christmas just us with the kids. We're trying to solidify our own holiday events. And family is really important to us. And so when my mother-in-law is saying, why aren't you coming and spending time with us? This is just so difficult. We're always together. I can't believe you would leave me alone on Christmas. They're clashing. And that's the guilt. But it doesn't mean your decision is bad. And that is this huge generational and cultural moment, I think, that we're having. Casey Davis talks about it as well, that it's morally neutral. It is not wrong to say, I don't want to drive the 8 hours in the middle of a snowstorm with a 2-month-old for Christmas. That's not wrong. It's that we are now all having different priorities and values that we're choosing to nurture and focus on.
I think this one's so tricky because for me, and I know I have a strong personality, if someone was making like these little passive aggressive comments, and I think a lot of times it's about the caring of the children, like the mother-in-law, the grandma is carrying a load for your family, and most of us do show appreciation and so much appreciation for that. But if someone kept bringing that energy towards me, it's like I'd want to find a different caregiver, because to me it's like, okay, you keep saying that, so this is bringing you some level of, there's some reason you have to keep saying this, like I'm gonna go a different direction.
And it is a choice that you get to make for your family. I know some people will say, we don't have anybody else. And so then that's well, how am I going to respond in those moments? Those are the self boundaries that sound, because here's the piece. You could hold up a mirror for this person repeatedly and say, this doesn't feel good. Please don't say those things. This is a guilt trip. And the other person most often will say, what? I'm not guilt tripping you. I would never do that. That's not my intention, but not really see the impact on you. And so then the self boundaries come in, which sounds like when she goes down that road, I'm going to go, and then change the topic. Or if she's complaining about how tired she is after she said yes to looking after the kids, I'm going to excuse myself to the bathroom and not engage in that conversation. I'm not going to feed into it, right? Because of course, with patterns, we often pull people to feed into that pattern. And it's like, see me, see me, see me. And I think for the martyr mother-in-law, what she really needs is validation and reassurance of her importance outside of those moments. Not in the moments when she's like, I did so much for you. Nobody's grateful for me. Maybe your husband can say, Mom, that's not true. And then change the topic and move on. And then change the topic and move on, not feeding into it. And then at another time saying, just want you to know we're grateful that we have this connection. And focus then not on what she does for the family, but focus on the connection of the relationship.
I love that. I think that's where we get into the real meat of the episode, when we're able to give these real life, like your response. We're not trying to make her change out of that. Abby and I were these are, 60, 70-year-old people. Like if we go into this relationship thinking, we're going to show you actually what you're doing is a martyr pattern and you need to change this pattern, that's not going to get us anywhere.
Most times, no. And there is this element of grief that we do in our relationships as well. The grief is that here is this person, it could be so amazing and it's not, and they don't want to do the work. I know many of my clients show up to my therapy room saying, I'm just so sad. My caregiver, my parent, they're 70 years old and they still don't believe they're worthy. They still talk about their body being quote unquote a certain way. And it's just so sad that they're not doing this work. And most of my clients they're between the ages of 20 to 55, but I'm not seeing the 70-year-old grandmother that shows up in my office. So this is, again, where's my power and control? And not power and control in that icky manipulative way, but more of the, I have a sense of agency here. And that might be deciding, you know what, grandma only comes over once a week to look after the kids, and we're going to find someone to do the other few days, because that interaction starts to feel less sticky then.
Mm.
Well, I also think about the fact that we're going to be mother-in-laws, God willing, someday. And Amy and I were talking
Yes.
about a month ago, and we're saying we're going to nail it with what we know now. But the next generation is going to come with a whole new set of boundaries and standards and expectations. So we're going to be in the same position at some point. And what we think is right and doing a really good job might not be what our daughter-in-laws or our son-in-laws are loving. So we just have to check ourselves a little bit on that side too.
The good news, Abby, is I have a section in my book about becoming the mother-in-law you want to be. And I walk you through these 3 processes, these 3 steps from the time you meet this person to then when dynamics and expectations start to change. And you're right. We are having these conversations, and they're uncomfortable conversations. This is not to ghost families, to create estrangements. It's to build relationships that work for people. And I say this repeatedly. Boundaries are not about excluding others. It's about supporting relationships in a way that works for everybody. And I can remember after the release of my first book, even my husband coming to me and saying, I didn't realize what boundaries were when you kept saying it before in our earlier days. He's like, I thought it kind of meant to do this all or nothing thing and cut off my family. And that right there was this cue of, we're using these words sometimes and our partners don't even know what it means. So then how do we get specific about what our needs are, what our wishes are, and to understand it's about keeping families together?
That's so good. And it's such a good reminder, especially when you're in the heat of it. Can I ask a personal question that I think other people might be able to relate to? And I think it's a little bit about personalities, but it's also about love languages. And when you're talking about the martyr personality, I couldn't relate less. My mother-in-law is so generous. She loves being generous, but she gives with her whole heart, and she somehow can just continue to give, continue to give, and continue to give. And she gives a lot of gifts.
Ooh.
So that is one thing that I didn't grow up with a lot of gifts. My parents don't give a lot of gifts. She shows up with the most amazing, sometimes extravagant gifts, things that have been specifically picked out. She has done the research. She loves doing it. And then when my family shows up, they really value quality time, and they're spending time, they're getting rough, they're getting, dirty in the backyard. They're just having so much fun together. But it's gotten to the point where over the last several years, our kids, when my parents show up, will say, did you bring me something? Like, Nana, did you bring me something? Grandpappy, do you have anything for me? And it's almost become kind of an expectation. And we see Colin's parents a lot. We see them a lot more than my parents, I would say. And so a lot of gifts are coming into the house. But we also want to make sure our kids know that it's not the norm. Not every kid, as soon as grandma shows up, is always getting a gift. That might be the norm for grandma because she loves doing that. But we want to make sure that they know it's not the norm. And at the same time, I don't want my parents to feel like the lesser grandparent, or to feel bad or feel guilty for not bringing something. And it's almost turned into that a little bit. So what would you do in this situation? I just want to make sure that all parties involved, our kids, both sets of my parents, are feeling good, and that anything that I can do to make sure that it just goes better than it is right now.
Abby, I so appreciate your vulnerability around asking this question. And I wanted to start by acknowledging that good girl part of you that comes in and says, I want everyone to feel good. And in relationships, that's not always going to be the case. And that sometimes we're going to kind of have this conflict or not good feelings, but we can always come back and connect and refocus on what's important. So I think let's move away from making sure everybody feels good and instead focusing on what really matters. Step 1, we're not going to allow everyone to feel good because that's just not possible. We're going to first focus on what's really important. And I think what I hear from you is the most important thing here is your kids having a good relationship. We don't even get to control the good part, but the relationship with both sides of the grandparents. And gosh, I just think that is also one of the top reasons that women come into my therapy room. It's not so that we're villainizing one family over the other. And the other kind of step 2 I want to add in here is removing the myth of equalness or sameness. No two families are going to be the same. And I hear this from a lot of clients. So it's not your case, but I want to label this in case it's someone else's who's listening, is that if your mother-in-law comes and says, well, why do you see your mom all the time? If you saw her for this amount of time on Thanksgiving, then you should see me for this amount of time. And we want to teach our kids this thing, which is also what we model to our families. Not all relationships are the same. And you both have talked about it even in the context of your own marriages and mental load and how you show up with your own strengths. And so families look different. So now we take then what's important and we ask ourselves, where do I have control? So we could go, and I just want to work out the different roads. You could go to your in-laws and say, and so here's the thing. It's not actually going to be a boundary when you go to your in-laws and say, we love the gifts, please don't bring them. When you ask someone to do something, that's not a boundary, it's a request. And that's tricky because they get to do whatever they want. You could turn blue in the face saying, no more gifts. Don't bring gifts. Oh, gifts again. Thank you so much. Don't bring them next time. You could cut them off at the door and say, oh, I'm going to take these gifts and put them in the garage. Right? Like it's just not going to work. You can decide your own boundaries, though. I did this with a client. We worked through, okay, so you've asked her to not give kids all of these things and it's still not working. So now what are you going to do with it? So you get to decide once it's in your home, it's a gift, you get to decide on that. Okay, so we don't get to control that. And then also too, it's not like you're going to go to your parents and say, well, maybe you should just bring them more gifts because that's not authentic to them, right? That doesn't feel good for them. So now we're coming back to the value of helping your kids have positive relationships with both sides. The area you have control over is sharing your values and information with the kids. And so this is likely an outside comment after your parents leave saying, what filled your heart up when you were with Grandma and Grandpa? What felt good about that? Isn't it so fun? And you can even draw the difference. Yes, some people, and like really label it for your kids. We all show love in different ways. It's not right or wrong. It's just everyone has different ways. And, it's interesting because you're on the floor and you're laughing and playing all these games over here. And then sometimes you get toys over there and that's just different. And then maybe also too, this is also about teaching something to your kids around the asking about gifts. I mean, kids are going to be kids. It's like a reward system. Ooh, a gift. I love it. Right. And then maybe it's also a conversation with your parents to help support them, giving them that reassurance. The kids love you, rough and tumbling, but hey, just so you know, they're just kids. Kids are motivated by gifts. And so just let that wash off your back. Don't focus on it. You then say, the gift is me, or, you be silly and you tap into the mode that's you, and then you go and play the game and then you go from there. Or maybe your parents choose a different way to build that bond together. But I think that's where you have the most control.
I like that. And I think it's something that we can do right away. We're even thinking about these next couple of weekends, and we do have both sets of grandparents visiting the next couple of weekends. So I think we can put into practice right away. And maybe it's for you guys, it's not for you listening, it's not gifts. Maybe it's something else that is just so different between your in-laws and your parents. And it just sticks out like a sore thumb because it just feels so different. And even just growing up, you might not be used to it. And all of a sudden your partner, that's all that they're used to. So I'm just glad that you went through those pieces of it, because you're right. Everyone loves in different ways, and we need to learn that, and we can help our kids learn it at the same time.
I think something that varies between families sometimes can be effort, like the wanting to be there. And that comes into my DMs a lot because Drew's family and my dad are so involved in our lives. I mean, truly, we see them all the time. They want to be there. They're so happy to be grandparents. And some grandparents are not like that. And so when the followers and the people are seeing, oh my gosh, look at that grandparent showing up so strong, or maybe in other people's situation, it's one side shows up so strong, the other one's that's not really their priority. How do you help people work through that type of feeling?
That one is such a tough one. And for people who are in that, I just want to show up with a lot of compassion and say, all of your feelings make sense around that. You came into this union hoping and wishing for an extended family. And most people do enter into relationships that way. And so there's this element of grief in here and acceptance. It calls to one of the types of mothers-in-law I point out, which is the distancer. And I hear this all the time from people I work with, is that grandma lives 20 minutes down the road and I've only seen her 4 times. And for a lot of people, and I think this is why this book is so important right now, is that a lot of people are like, cut her off. She doesn't deserve to be part of your kid's life. She's making that choice. And again, it comes back to, well, what's really important to you? And can you accept what she has to offer? We can't change her. We can't control her, but we can do the work for ourselves and for our children. This is really about step 5 in my vault method. And it's about helping you take action and make a plan around this. And part of that step is sometimes it's having a conversation with the grandparents. And maybe that nudges something. Sometimes it's your approach and how you show up, being more specific. 20 minutes down the road, haven't seen grandma for a long time. Hey, mom, come over this Sunday. We've got brownies, will be at the park. And, it's just that 20-minute interaction. You're continuing to invite, if that's not exhausting you. But then the other avenue here too is you accepting and grieving that that's not who that person is. They're not interested in changing. And then you also do the work with your kids because your kids are going to feel it too. Well, why doesn't grandma come over? Well, I don't get to see grandma a lot. And we don't blame or shame grandparents. We validate kids' feelings and their reality. We say, I know this is not about you. You are such a lovable kid. Oh my gosh, when we were playing on the slide the other day, I was laughing so hard with you. And sometimes people make their own choices, but it's not about you. I think sometimes we need to hear that message, don't you think?
I
That
think
it's
so.
like,
Yes, as parents, yes.
Well, yeah, I think because I see a lot of this discourse too, is that often as humans, I think we get in trouble when we always think like, I would never do that. Like, I am going to be there. I am going to do this. How could they? And I get where that's coming from because a lot of us, we feel so loving towards our kids. Like, we can hardly imagine it any other way. But I think if we always have that current running through us, it doesn't, to your point, like it doesn't help us to make the connection when we can, because you always kind of have this like charged attitude toward the relationship. But I also understand it is very hard.
I use this analogy in therapy. It comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. It's been one of the most powerful tools I've picked up over the last 12 plus years that when I started using it is the sense of dropping the rope. So when we judge, when we criticize, when we want them to change, we're grabbing the rope, we're wrestling with it. And that is creating suffering inside of us. And it's harder because, of course, you can't engage in your life if you're over here like, why don't they? Like, I can't believe they're not showing up. Oh, another birthday and no gift. You're pulling this rope, but you don't get to be involved in your life over here. So you drop the rope. Every time your mind wrestles with it again, you say, is this the story I want to tell myself? Can I notice that I'm having this painful moment again? And that, the pang in my heart or my belly, my gut, can I just drop the rope? This is this person, that's who they are. And I'm going to then decide, what do I want? What do I desire? How can I focus on this? And sometimes for many people, it is about building that village around you.
Yeah, I think you just hit on something there. I think that was the biggest gift my therapist gave me when I was in therapy in 2020 was there was just some relationships where I was just literally pulling that rope so hard.
Yeah.
And it's not that you're like, oh, I'm not going to have a relationship with him. It's just that you're going to put it down. It feels more calm. You're not going to constantly be wrestling with it. You're going to say, you know what? Sometimes it's okay to match someone else's effort and energy. They shouldn't get even more of mine because they're not giving me what I wish they would. And she was like, and it's okay to wish that this was better. Like, it's okay to say, I wish this was different.
It speaks also to when you're consuming media. So remember, especially coming up around the holidays, you are going to see everybody smiling in pictures. They're all going to be together. You're going to see the little 5-second clip of the table and all the family is there. And that pang shows up for you. And I always say, we don't have to say, well, that's not really how, we can acknowledge that these 5-second clips do not show everything and that all people, so here's the compassionate piece. All people struggle in some way in relationships. And of course, I am feeling this way. And that's all you need to hold on to in those moments.
Absolutely.
I think there's just so many good pieces that were covered in this interview. We love having you on.
Mm-hmm.
Can you let us know if there's anything else that you're thinking of that our audience of women who have, grade school kids, maybe down to newborns, but want their relationships to be better with their in-laws? They want them to continue to improve. Anything else you could give to that listener that might be here right now?
Oh my goodness. I mean, how do we distill this all down into one moment? I think one of the biggest pieces is really around focusing on a solid union with your partner, because everything trickles down from that. Your ability to get up in the night, your ability to solve the toddler meltdown that's happening in front of you, your resilience is stronger when you and your partner feel connected. And I know you two have talked about this here. We've talked about it on other episodes I've been on with you, that it's not going to look the same as it was. But now, how do you, small moments every single day, get intentional in your marriage and your partnership so that you two can feel good? Because when you feel good, if mom knocks on the door with all of these gifts, if the work stress is showing up, if you're not sleeping through the night, you've got that solid base to lean back on. And I think that's one of the most important things for listeners to focus on.
I absolutely agree with that one. And I can stamp that. I tried otherwise, like when all that stress and tension builds up. But I found, if we're a solid home base for each other, it makes everything else better and easier. Yeah. Dr. Tracy, we love you so much. Thank you so much for being on. Please tell the people where they can find more of you and the important work that you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. One of the best things is for you to go check out my book. It's on my website, drtracyd.com. It's available November 4th. Tell your friends about it as well. Share this episode with them, and then say hello to me on social at Dr. Tracy D.
It's perfect time for the holidays. Like, we'll be prepared going into the holidays.
Right in time. Right on time. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Can I just pause to say, like, episode 16 and 17, you're here at episodes over 300, the top 0.4% of podcast episodes. Like, you two are I just admire what you're doing so much. And I've been grateful to see your growth and progression for you individually, as your families, and then also on this podcast and community.
Well, right back at you. The work that you're doing is so important. And you really have been with us since those very first couple of episodes. So we'll make sure to link all of those in the show notes. So make sure to go below, guys, check those out, and check out Tracy D's new book. Everything you've done is so good. And the in-law stuff, we know so many people in our community are still struggling with it. So thank you again for being on. And for her South listeners, we'll talk to you next.